My name is Julie Maupin, and I work for the IOTA Foundation in Berlin. I direct social impact and public regulatory affairs for IOTA. My professional background is I am a lawyer and also an economist, and I worked for many years in academia as an academic. I actually discovered blockchain while teaching international economic law as a professor at Duke. Came across Bitcoin and got really fascinated by it and kind of dove into the rabbit hole and never came back out. Yes, I remember actually. So there's a Bitcoin evangelist in Canada whose name is Kyle Kemper, and I came across Kyle at a conference, sort of an academic, kind of quasi-academic conference that I organized for people to look at the intersection between legal and regulatory issues and the evolving blockchain space. Really fascinating discussion. We had a lot of great people there because Toronto was quite an Ethereum hub in the early days and still is. And I met Kyle Kemper there, and he gave me a piece of art that was Bitcoin artwork. Very crazy picture of a woman in sort of an iconic kind of an image with lots of technology sorts of overlays and images, very multi-layered piece of art that he created himself. And embedded in the back of the artwork was a QR code with Bitcoin. It's a great question. Because I focus on social impact side of blockchain and also the regulatory affairs, I think that those are the two audiences that are most affected by my work, or I hope are most affected by my work, which is to say I'm really passionate about how technologies can be used to advance the economic empowerment of individuals in developing and transitioning countries. And that's why I work a lot with my team on things like solving digital identity for people who have no identity documents, or working on means of financial inclusion for people who don't have bank accounts. Services for refugees to be able to port their accreditations and their skill certifications and university certificates and things like that with them as they move through asylum systems and immigration systems and things like that. Those are the key target audiences in my mind of people that I want to benefit. But also, people here, people like you and me, who really need to have access to better government services in terms of smart cities, in terms of being able to efficiently interact with our government bureaucracies so that I don't have to go and stand in line for 3 hours at a government building to get whatever piece of paper I need in order to live my life as a citizen here. And yeah, I mean, basically just members of the general public with a strong focus on developing countries, but also here in Europe and in North America and around the world in developed settings. Technology affects all of us. Really, everybody's impacted by it. I think the Libra is overall a positive development for the space, for the blockchain space, and also for the focus that it's bringing back to financial inclusion, which tends to be a forgotten topic and sort of shoved off to the side by tech innovators. So I'm really glad for that component of it, that it has really brought that back into the center of focus. Obviously the issue when you have a player like Facebook enter a space like that is that the real value that they bring is the size of their network. It's a platform economy, essentially, and because they have aggregated a large number of users, including in the developed world, they can reach a large number of people, and potentially through that offer new types of payment systems. The downside is that they're doing that in a 100% traditional banking system way. They're working with all of the big financial players, banks, Visa, MasterCard, etc., who have an interest in maintaining their slice of the financial system pie. And that financial system has historically not served the poor. So one has to look at it with a tinge of gratitude that it's happening, that it's drawing focus to this problem again, but also a tinge of skepticism that these are the same people who have not managed to draw the poor into the global banking system, who have not managed to solve, what in economics we call externalities, problems of market externalities. This segment of the population is not profitable enough for the big banking system to serve their needs. And now, maybe Facebook will help them make it profitable enough, but at the end of the day, it will be, I think, the scrappier, smaller innovators who are genuinely focusing on the problem of financial inclusion and not focusing on maintaining their own market power. Those will be the places where the real innovation will come from. And that's why, I have a lot of hope and a lot of faith in the small, scrappy projects that are using open, public, permissionless systems like IOTA is trying to do. That's a really important question. So right now IOTA still has a coordinator, which, as you noted, is an element of centralization in the system. It's an open source coordinator now, so it's part of the set of code that's maintained by the broader IOTA community. And that's a step in the right direction, but obviously the project we call Coordicide, just getting rid of the coordinator altogether, will be the ultimate step in completely, fully decentralizing, and really an important milestone for IOTA and for distributed ledgers in general, to really fully decentralize in that way without miners. And that's a huge step because you don't have the transaction fees of mining. And all the governance problems that brings along with it. But you're right that just having a functioning, even if it's fully scalable, decentralized system, it's not a panacea. It doesn't solve all problems. And one of the really tricky things about IOTA and about any distributed ledger technology or blockchain is that they're not particularly user-friendly. And we are still in the early days, like in the early days of the internet, where people didn't understand what it means and how it works and what is TCP/IP and why do I have to type in HTTP and these slashes, what are they doing, and all of that. It has to really go a much, much further distance in terms of becoming user-friendly so that the average person can use it to do stuff that's useful without having to think about how it's happening in the background. It should just be click, click, boom, boom. I use this because it works and it's exciting and it makes my life easier and it makes my financial transactions cheaper and it gives me control of my data and all these wonderful benefits without having to think about, without having to understand how it works and without having to troubleshoot and without having to call up their friends for tech support and say, oh, my wallet's not working, can you help me figure out how to XYZ? So there's a huge, we've made some significant leaps, in the past year with the new Trinity wallet for IOTA and everything, which I think really is one of the best wallets, maybe the best in the crypto space out there, super user-friendly, in many languages user-friendly even now. But there's a lot more that needs to happen. Also for the developer community to be able to run nodes and the full nodes in particular and permanodes and all of the components of the system need to be pretty idiot-proof so that it's really easy and cheap and not a lot of hassle to maintain the system. So yeah, definitely education, but also improvement of the user interface and of the developer tools as well. Well, IOTA is designed for the Internet of Things, and it's a general purpose technology. It's a technology that can be used by startup entrepreneurs to build stuff that you and I have never even thought of before, but it also obviously can be adopted by existing industry to do things that they're trying to push in terms of their own internal R&D and technological development. And the reason that IOTA works with industry is very simple. Industry has use cases where they need this technology now, and by working together with them hand in hand, we also learn a great deal about what the technology has to be able to do in order to make it production ready. So when we work with them and we find out they need this feature that we hadn't thought of because our independent developers sitting in a vacuum don't have that experience and don't have that particular requirement, they didn't build it in, it gives us feedback, it gives us useful feedback of other things that we can, other tools that we can develop, other SDKs, other plugins, other whatever, ways of making our protocol more interoperable with others. These are all technical design decisions where if you make them in a vacuum, you might make them in one direction, but if you make them while listening to the feedback not only of industry, but also governments and others that we're working with, then you make different decisions. And I think in the end of the day, you have more input, so you have a better quality protocol. That's the approach. Yeah, well, you mentioned privacy. That's certainly one. We have had some leaders in the space really come out and push the envelope on this. I think everybody in the space can be grateful to the team at Zcash and Monero and the others who have really thought about different ways of making privacy-focused protocols. And IOTA, like everyone else, takes this very seriously. And we're trying to figure out how do we integrate those innovations into our technology as well. It's not a trivial problem because something like zero-knowledge proofs they're big from a data perspective, and we're working on a technology that's for IoT devices. So you have to figure out how to do big in a small way, and like a really, really small way. And that's a challenge, but it's an engineering challenge, and it's just a question of time, really. You have to have the motivation and the commitment to get there, and that's why it's fantastic that we have other projects in the space that are pushing the advancement of new cryptographic tools. That's one issue. The second issue that I would mention is definitely the challenge of quantum computing. I think there's still a lot of projects that are not paying attention to the reality of needing to move to post-quantum cryptography. IOTA certainly has had its news flashes in the past because of its cryptographic choices, which have not always been wonderfully smiled upon by the cryptography community. Understandably so. Cryptography is hard, it's easy to get it wrong, and you don't want to play with other people's money, basically. But at the same time, we also can't sit on our laurels and just say, well, we'll figure it out when quantum computing suddenly bursts onto the market, because we're playing with other people's money if we do that, right? So we have to experiment actively and be working on post-quantum cryptography. It's why we use one-time signatures in IOTA. Because even if you have a quantum computer, you can't hack it because you only use it once, and then you move on to the next signature for the next transaction. So until we have better or different ways of doing that, I think that more people should be experimenting with it. It's extremely not user-friendly, which is another reason why people don't do it. You have to build your wallets and your customer tools and user tools in a way that they don't have to know that they're using a different signature each time, which is tricky, but can be done. So that's another issue that has not received significant coverage. And then, I think just the issue of fiat on and off ramps is another that hasn't been significantly addressed by a lot of projects, because people are just hoping that adoption will come to the crypto space and then everyone will just forget about the euro and the dollar and the renminbi and the yen. But we live in today's world where those currencies are a reality of our lives, and you can't pay your taxes in IOTA or Bitcoin or whatever, and it will be a long time before that happens. So we need to have these on-ramps and off-ramps well thought through in a systematic way that also the governments are comfortable with. That would be another area, I think, that needs more thought. And then just adoption. What does it look like to have adoption? And I talked in my talk today a little bit about the JLR, the Jaguar, IOTA wallet. That's an example of really alternative kind of adoption, where you have adoption of traditional auto manufacturer and using IOTA for streaming of data streams in order to improve their knowledge about how their cars should drive, the performance of the potential of future self-driving cars. That's a type of adoption too. It doesn't necessarily mean that I need to be able to pay for my coffee at every coffee shop with IOTA. So I think we need to think more broadly about what adoption means also. I think it's really a two-way street. So, we do have people at the IOTA Foundation who are dedicated to looking outward and trying to get the lay of the land and understand what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening in the government space, what's happening with consumer behavior and consumer attitudes towards technology, or ways that we interact physically even with technology. And what's happening in the research and development and technology engineering areas that are bordering on our technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, in the hardware segment of IoT devices, and what kinds of new sensors are coming on the market and how are they powered, and what kind of what kind of interfaces do we need to design to make our network compatible with them, et cetera. So it's a very broad spectrum where we have teams and people specifically dedicated to keeping an eye on those trends and trying to make sure that we're designing toward them, ideally keeping a step ahead of them as well so that we can incorporate them into our own plan. And then the other side is really we have a strong focus on building a community at IOTA, and this is always, never ceases to amaze me, the things that come in from the community. This is why we launched the Ecosystem Development Fund, for example, where people can just come to the foundation and say, hey, I want to build this. I have this idea for a cool project. Can you fund me a little bit to help me get this going? And people contact us all the time in every imaginable way. Contact.iota.org, on our Discord community, through the Ecosystem Development Fund. People approach us at conferences with a demo of, hey, look what I built, and they show us on their phone or their laptop or whatever. And it never ceases to amaze me, the ingenuity of people who are able to interact with a permissionless technology. And so we get feedback through that. And their ideas push our ideas, and we'll discuss it in our internal foundation Slack and say, hey, I was approached by this person who did this, let's all check this out. And then our team looks at it and says, oh, that's actually a really clever way to implement this one little piece. We should think about doing that in the Trinity wallet, or we should think about doing that in IRI, or whatever part of the IOTA protocol it might be. Yeah, so I was on the opening panel, or the opening slate of speakers at the conference. The topic was the future of society. And so we basically just discussed what could society look like if we apply our minds creatively to thinking about how to solve societal challenges using blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. So I gave some examples of some of the things that IOTA is trying to do in that space, working on smart cities, working on new mobility infrastructures, supply chain kinds of solutions, digital identity, universal digital identity without borders, those kinds of ideas. And I think it worked really nicely because there was also an opening talk by sort of a sustainable development goals evangelist who really set the stage of how and why we all need to work together to be focusing on making our planet a more sustainable, making our economy more sustainable for the sake of our planet and our species. And yeah, I'm thinking about technology through that lens, I think is exactly the right note to start off the conference on, and really set the stage that this is not just about building sexy things. It's about making sure that we have a planet that we all want to inhabit and can inhabit, and that everybody can inhabit in an equal opportunity kind of way. On the first question, whether Hamburg has an opportunity to become one of the leading cities in Europe in terms of green cities. Yeah, I mean, I think any city that really puts its mind to it can do that, especially in Europe. I mean, all the ingredients are here. We have a very good tax system. We have very good public infrastructure. You're starting from quite a high bar, and democratic institutions work here as well, and they work fairly seamlessly. They're too slow, but they work, and they're predictably working. So yeah, absolutely. I think that when I think about the different cities that we've engaged with in terms of smart cities work as the IOTA Foundation, really what sets apart the ones that are making huge leaps forward and the ones that are just kind of talking about it is leadership. At the end of the day, there's somebody at a high level in city leadership who just says, I'm going to make this the hill that I die on, and we are going to, come hell or high water, make Hamburg a green city. And you have to have passionate leadership, and then that person or those people who are passionate leaders, really environmental leaders, also need to be good at understanding that the only way to transform a city is to build a ground-up sort of groundswell of support. You have to have community interest, you have to have community buy-in, you have to get people excited about how their lives can be better by using green technologies, not just guilting them, you should switch to green because it's better for the earth. That's not terribly motivating, right? It really needs to bring that warm, fuzzy feeling, as well as a tangible benefit. You know, I can get to work faster, and the road noise outside of my apartment will be less. And you know, all these kinds of things where people can really see why it benefits us to live in smart cities. The second question was, what is IOTA doing about energy consumption, right? Okay, so IOTA, not being a blockchain, is not based on the proof of work system that Bitcoin uses or other blockchains, public permissionless blockchains. It doesn't send transactions to be batched together and mined in this proof of work system, which is extremely energy intensive, as we've seen with Bitcoin. There are systems that are better and optimized better for energy consumption than Bitcoin. It's certainly, it was the first. You wouldn't expect it to be the most efficient, given that it was the first. And it's gotten some changes along the way that have made it slightly more energy efficient as well. But at the end of the day, the design is just wrong. If you are looking for an energy efficient system, proof of work is not it. So that's why people have been researching proof of stake and other kinds of alternatives. And IOTA has used a directed acyclic graph in order to make it possible to have lots of small little microtransactions that can be processed on very, very small devices. In the end, some of the higher capacity calculations have to get outsourced to higher capacity nodes, because your Apple Watch or the sensor in your car doesn't have the capacity to be a full node and do all these transactions in a network. So we have to have very, very small capacity devices being able to participate, as well as light nodes, as well as full nodes. And they all have to perform different types of processes within the system to keep the whole functioning. It's a symbiotic kind of approach to a network, rather than a completely replicated, redundant approach where everybody does the same thing. That will never be energy efficient enough. If you read the white paper on Coordicide, you'll see the approach that the IOTA research and engineering teams are taking to Coordicide is something called Shimmer, which uses a probabilistic sort of version of consensus, which means that you can do sampling rather than having to do a complete 100% overview of the entire network at the same time, and that vastly reduces your energy needs. Thank you.